Welcome to Echoes of the Past, the channel where history lives, breathes, and speaks. It's raw, real, and unfiltered. These are the true stories they didn't teach you in school. If you love real storytelling, ancient warfare, African kingdoms, biblical conflicts, philosophy of power, and the lost voices of the past, you belong here. Subscribe now to Echoes of the Past, because the past isn't dead.
Africa was not a jungle. Empires, spiritual traditions.
In the misty folds of the 9th century, the land that would become England was a fractured realm, a patchwork of kingdoms besieged by the relentless fury of Viking raiders. Out of this chaos emerged Alfred of Wessex, later known as Alfred the Great, a king whose vision transcended mere survival. With unyielding determination, he transformed his court into a beacon of learning, preserving ancient knowledge and nurturing the English language itself. On the battlefield, Alfred was both strategist and warrior, rallying his men in the shadow of the shield wall, turning desperate last stands into victories that stitched together the fragile fabric of a united England. His reign became a blueprint for kingship, a fusion of martial prowess, wisdom, and the conviction that a king's duty was to both protect and enlighten his people. Aethelstan, grandson of Alfred, would accomplish what his forebears only dreamed of, forging a single English kingdom from the fractured territories of Mercia, Wessex, Northumbria, and beyond. His coronation was not just a ceremony, but a declaration to the world. England had arrived. Aethelstan's reach extended beyond the battlefield. He cultivated alliances across Europe, marrying his sisters into royal houses and securing England's place on the international stage. At the Battle of Brunanburh in 937, he faced an unprecedented coalition of Scots, Norse, and Britons. The clash was brutal, steel meeting steel, the cries of the wounded echoing across the moor. But Aethelstan's resolve held firm. When the dust settled, England's sovereignty stood unchallenged, and Aethelstan's name was etched into history as its first true king. The year 1066 shattered the old order. William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the Channel with a claim to England's throne and an army of hardened knights. On the fields of Hastings, Harold Godwinson's Anglo-Saxon forces met William's disciplined Norman cavalry. The battle was merciless. Arrows darkened the sky, horses trampled the wounded, and the Saxon shield wall splintered under relentless assault. William's victory was more than a change of kings. It was a cultural earthquake. Norman castles rose across the land, French words seeped into English speech, and the feudal system took root. England was now tethered to continental Europe in a way it had never been before, its destiny shaped by the iron will of a conqueror. By the reign of King John, the monarchy's power seemed absolute, until his own barons rose against him. England was weary of John's failed wars in France, his crushing taxes, and his heavy-handed rule. In 1215 at Runnymede, the king stood on the muddy banks of the Thames, surrounded by armed nobles demanding a charter that would bind even the monarch to the law. With a trembling hand, John affixed his seal to the Magna Carta, a document that, though modest in its immediate effect, would echo through centuries as a cornerstone of liberty, inspiring constitutions and revolutions far beyond England's shores. England in the mid-15th century was a nation tearing itself apart. Two branches of the royal Plantagenet family, the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York, plunged the realm into a dynastic civil war that would rage for over 3 decades. The battles were savage and personal. Nobles switched sides for survival, villages burned, and royal blood was spilled on both sides. Kings came and went with dizzying speed. Henry VI's fragile rule crumbling under the force of Edward IV's ambition, the shadowy rise of Richard III, and the final decisive clash at Bosworth Field in 1485, where a young Henry Tudor seized victory in the crown. This war was not only a struggle for power, but a test of England's very identity, reshaping the monarchy into a far more centralized force. Henry VIII ascended the throne as a charismatic young king, athletic, intelligent, and adored by his people. Yet his reign would tear apart the spiritual fabric of England. His obsession with securing a male heir drove him to defy the Pope and sever centuries of religious unity, birthing the Church of England under his own supremacy. Monasteries, centuries-old centers of learning and charity, were dissolved, their treasures seized, their lands redistributed. 6 marriages marked his personal life, each a tale of love, ambition, and tragedy. The once golden prince aged into a paranoid, iron-willed ruler, his waistline and power growing in equal measure, leaving behind a realm forever altered by the Reformation. Elizabeth I inherited a fragile throne in a divided kingdom. Surrounded by religious turmoil and foreign threats, she proved herself a master of diplomacy and statecraft. Under her, England flourished. Literature reached new heights with Shakespeare. Trade expanded and the arts thrived. Yet her reign was not without peril. The Spanish Armada's looming threat in 1588 could have spelled disaster. Against all odds, her navy, aided by storms and strategy, turned back the might of Spain, cementing England's naval reputation. Elizabeth remained unmarried, weaving her identity into that of the nation, a queen who embodied both majesty and pragmatism, ruling with a steady hand for 45 years. The Stuart dynasty brought with it visions of absolute monarchy that clashed violently with England's evolving parliamentary power. Charles I's belief in the divine right of kings set him on a collision course with his subjects. The English Civil War erupted, royalists against parliamentarians, splitting families, towns, and loyalties. Battles like Naseby turned the tide against the king, and in a moment unthinkable to the medieval mind, Charles III was tried and executed by his own people in 1649. England became a republic under Oliver Cromwell, a grim, austere experiment that revealed just how deeply monarchy was woven into the nation's soul. After years of Puritan austerity, the monarchy returned in a wave of color and revelry. Charles II, known as the Merry Monarch, brought back theater, music, and courtly splendor. Yet beneath the pageantry lay deep challenges. The Great Plague of 1665, the Great Fire of London in 1666, and ongoing political tensions. Charles navigated these crises with charm and cunning, maintaining his throne while England slowly edged toward a modern constitutional monarchy. His reign was a reminder that the crown could bend to survive. The late Stuart era ended with a bloodless coup that changed the monarchy forever. James II's Catholic faith and attempts at absolutism drove Protestant nobles to invite William of Orange and his wife Mary to take the throne. The Glorious Revolution affirmed parliamentary supremacy over the crown, enshrined in the Bill of Rights of 1689. The king and queen now ruled not by divine right, but by the consent of the governed, a seismic shift in political history. Queen Anne's reign witnessed the 1707 Act of Union, merging England and Scotland into the Kingdom of Great Britain. Though plagued by ill health and personal tragedy, 17 pregnancies ending in loss, she presided over a nation growing in power. The War of the Spanish Succession tested British military might, and victories like Blenheim under the Duke of Marlborough showcased a rising empire. Anne's death without an heir marked the end of the Stuart line and the beginning of Hanoverian rule. With George I's arrival from Hanover, a new royal house took the throne, speaking little English but steering Britain into a new political age. Prime ministers emerged as powerful figures, and the empire expanded across the seas. Under George III, Britain triumphed over France in the 7 Years' War but lost its American colonies, a bitter blow. Yet industrial and agricultural revolutions transformed the nation's wealth and society, laying the foundations for Victorian grandeur. When the young Princess Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, she was just 18 years old, a shy but determined girl suddenly thrust into the heart of Britain's vast empire. Her reign would become the longest in British history at the time, spanning more than 6 decades, and forever shaping the moral and cultural identity of an era that now bears her name, the Victorian Age. The world around her was rapidly changing. Steam engines thundered across the countryside, great ships cut through the oceans, and Britain's industrial might was unmatched. Yet Victoria herself was more than a ceremonial figure. She was a devoted mother, a fiercely opinionated sovereign, and a ruler who saw herself as the guardian of her people's moral values. Her marriage to Prince Albert brought stability and dignity to the monarchy, but also deep personal tragedy when Albert died young, plunging Victoria into decades of mourning. Under her reign, the British Empire expanded across continents, the empire on which the sun never sets. But it also faced complex challenges: social unrest at home, wars abroad, and the simmering tensions of industrial inequality. The Victorian age was a paradox, a time of strict morals and dazzling progress, but also of grinding poverty and imperial domination. And through it all, Victoria remained a towering symbol of continuity. The death of Queen Victoria in 1901 closed the book on a monumental era and ushered in a new chapter under her son, Edward VII. His reign, short but glittering, was marked by elegance, opulence, and a more socially relaxed court. Known as the Uncle of Europe due to his many royal relatives across the continent, Edward VII cultivated diplomacy while embracing the modernity of the new century. But the glamour of the Edwardian years masked a storm brewing on the horizon. When George V succeeded in 1910, he inherited a world racing toward catastrophe. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand set off a chain of alliances that dragged Britain into the First World War, a conflict unlike anything humanity had seen. The trenches of the Western Front became killing fields of mud, gas, and wire. Millions died, empires crumbled, and the old order of Europe trembled. King George V became a unifying figure, visiting wounded soldiers, speaking to troops in the mud, and boosting morale back home. Yet the war left Britain deeply scarred, physically, economically, and emotionally. The Edwardian sparkle was gone, replaced by the grim reality of the modern age. The 1930s brought both glamour and scandal to the British monarchy. When Edward VIII ascended the throne in 1936, he was charismatic, handsome, and widely adored. But he was also deeply unconventional. His love affair with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, shocked the establishment. The problem was not merely personal, it was constitutional. As king, Edward was also head of the Church of England, which at the time forbade the remarriage of divorced persons with living ex-spouses. Choosing love over duty, Edward stunned the nation by abdicating the throne after less than a year, declaring in a historic broadcast that he could not carry out his duties without the help and support of the woman I love. The decision rocked the monarchy's stability and thrust his younger brother, the shy and reluctant George VI, into the role of king on the eve of World War II. King George VI, never destined for the throne, rose to the challenge in Britain's darkest hour. A man plagued by a stammer, he nonetheless became a steadying voice during World War II. With his wife, Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, he refused to leave London during the Blitz, even after Buckingham Palace was bombed. His wartime speeches, halting yet heartfelt, inspired a nation under siege. In those years, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany until American entry into the war. The king visited bombed neighborhoods, spoke to workers in factories producing Spitfires, and met with Churchill in strategy rooms thick with cigar smoke. His reign became a symbol of resilience, proving that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. When Elizabeth II was crowned in 1953, the post-war world was already shifting. Britain's empire was dissolving into a commonwealth of independent nations. The Queen, young and graceful, became the face of a new kind of monarchy, one that sought relevance in a rapidly modernizing society. Television brought her coronation into millions of homes worldwide, marking a turning point in royal visibility. She traveled tirelessly, visiting newly independent countries, forging personal connections with leaders, and adapting royal traditions to modern tastes. The 1960s and 70s brought cultural revolutions, economic challenges, and questions about the monarchy's role. Yet Elizabeth's poise and steadfast commitment anchored the crown in times of change. The late 20th century tested the monarchy's ability to survive in an age of relentless media scrutiny. The fairy tale wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana in 1981 captivated the world. But behind the palace walls, the marriage faltered. Scandals, separations, and tragic events eroded public confidence. The Queen faced a particularly difficult year in 1992, her annus horribilis, with 3 royal marriages collapsing and a devastating fire at Windsor Castle. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 brought a tidal wave of grief and criticism toward the monarchy, forcing a re-evaluation of its relationship with the public. Entering the new millennium, Queen Elizabeth II embraced cautious modernization. The royal family became more open, engaging with digital media and addressing contemporary issues. Public events like William and Catherine's wedding in 2011 reignited royal enthusiasm, while the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 2012 celebrated her 60 years on the throne. Yet change was inevitable. In 2021, the Queen faced the loss of her beloved husband, Prince Philip. Her health declined, and in September 2022, the world mourned her passing. Her death marked the end of the Second Elizabethan age, closing a chapter of unmatched continuity in British history. When Charles III ascended the throne in 2022, he inherited not just a crown, but a monarchy facing profound questions. Climate change, social inequality, and global instability define his era. Charles brings decades of preparation. As Prince of Wales, he championed environmental causes, interfaith dialogue, and sustainable development long before they were mainstream. His reign will determine whether the monarchy can remain relevant in the 21st century, balancing tradition with reform. The eyes of the world watch closely as Britain navigates a new age under a king who has waited a lifetime to lead.